The sound that haunts Amelia isn't the explosion of laughter. It isn't the collective, sharp gasp from the wealthiest families in Boston. It isn't even the voice of her husband, Thomas, standing frozen, his silence a blade in her back. The sound that echoes is the dry, vicious tear of silk. It's the sound of her mother-in-law's hand, adorned with a gaudy diamond, ripping her dress from shoulder to waist, exposing her to a ballroom of strangers. "This is what happens to parasites," Margaret Davenport hissed, her face a mask of triumph. In that second, Amelia wasn't a wife. She was an example. The polished silver of the Davenport home felt cold to the touch, much like the family itself. Amelia had married into a name that echoed through the brick-lined streets of Beacon Hill, a name synonymous with old money and unspoken rules. The Davenports were a Boston institution, and Amelia, with her simple origins and her quiet passion for running a small, artisanal bakery in Cambridge, was a persistent, nagging anomaly. Her marriage to Thomas Davenport had, in its first year, felt like a whirlwind romance. He was charmed by her authenticity, her flour-dusted hands, and her complete lack of interest in his trust fund. But the charm, Amelia learned, was a coating that wore thin under the constant, abrasive pressure of his family. Thomas was a man molded by expectation, and his spine, it seemed, was forged from wax, melting steadily under the heat of his mother's disapproval. "Amelia, darling," Margaret Davenport would say, her voice dripping with a saccharine condescension that set Amelia's teeth on edge. "That apron. It's quaint, but you're a Davenport now. Don't you think it's time to leave the baking to the help?" Margaret, a woman who wore her Loro Piana sweaters like armor, saw Amelia's bakery, the gilded crust, as a personal affront. It wasn't a career, it was a hobby, and a dreadfully middle-class one at that. "She likes it, Mother," Thomas would murmur, not looking up from his copy of the Wall Street Journal. His defense was always lukewarm, a token gesture that died before it crossed the room. The tension was suffocating in the weeks leading up to the annual Davenport Foundation Charity Gala. This was not just a party. It was the cornerstone of the Davenports' social and financial calendar. It was where they cemented alliances, displayed their power, and, most importantly, laundered their reputation through seven-figure donations to art museums and opera houses. This year, the gala was more critical than ever. Richard Davenport, the family patriarch, was in the final stages of a desperate negotiation. A merger between the fading Davenport Industries and the monolithic, enigmatic powerhouse, Vance Holdings. A deal with Vance Holdings wasn't just a lifeline, it was a resurrection. The name Vance was spoken in hushed, reverent tones in their circles. The CEO, Arthur Vance, was a recluse, a ghost who moved markets and toppled corporations from a New York penthouse. He was rumored to be utterly ruthless, and the Davenports were terrified of him and desperate for his approval. "This gala must be perfect," Richard had announced at Sunday dinner, his eyes scanning the table. "Arthur Vance's COO is flying in. Every detail matters." Margaret's eyes had immediately flicked to Amelia. "Which is why, Amelia, you simply cannot wear that beige thing you wore last year. Claire and I will take you shopping. We can't have you looking like you're attending a PTA meeting." Claire, Thomas's sister, had snickered into a champagne flute. "Maybe she can just borrow one of the maid's uniforms, Mother. It would be more authentic." "Claire, be nice," Thomas said, with no force. Amelia had smiled, a tight, painful stretch of her lips. "Thank you, Margaret, but I have a dress." The truth was, Amelia had a past she never spoke of, a past locked away, just like the private number in her old, hidden flip phone. She had left a world of suffocating, sterile wealth to be normal, to be loved for who she was, not what she was. Her father, a man who saw the world in spreadsheets and stock tickers, had been apoplectic when she'd announced she was marrying Thomas Davenport, and that she would be doing so without her last name and without his fortune. "They're parasites, Amelia," her father's gravelly voice had warned her over a secure line. "They're third generation coasting on a name that's lost its shine. They will bleed you dry, and when they find you're not who they think you are, they'll hate you for it. But when they find out who you really are, they will be insufferable. You're making a terrible mistake." "I love him, Dad, and he loves me," she had insisted, her voice full of a naivete that now made her stomach clench. "Love?" he had scoffed. "A poor investment." Now, living in this gilded cage, his words felt like a prophecy. She had insisted on living modestly, using the profits from her bakery to support herself and Thomas, who was on a stipend from his family. This, she had believed, would prove her love was real. Instead, it had simply given the Davenports their ammunition. To them, her modesty wasn't a choice. It was a brand. The brand of poverty. The night before the gala, Thomas found her in their Cambridge apartment, staring at the dress she'd bought. It was a simple, elegant, deep blue silk gown from a small designer. "Is that it?" he asked, loosening his tie. "Mother's holding a Jason Wu gown for you at Saks." She put it on the family account. "I like this one, Thomas," Amelia said quietly. He sighed, the sound of exasperation she had come to know so well. "Amelia, can't you just, for one night, play the part? This Vance Holdings deal, it's everything. We can't afford any missteps. You represent me. You represent this family." "And when do you represent me, Thomas?" she asked, the words sharper than she intended. He flinched. "This isn't the time, Amelia. Just look the part. Please." He didn't wait for an answer, just walked into the shower, the sound of running water drowning out the silence of their failing marriage. Amelia clutched the silk dress, the paper-thin defense she had against the family that was about to tear her life apart. The Davenport mansion on Beacon Hill was a fortress of red brick and old-world arrogance. Tonight, it was illuminated from the foundation to the gables, a beacon of Brahmin prestige drawing in the city's elite. Valets in crisp uniforms rushed to open the doors of identical black Rolls-Royce and Bentley vehicles, while flashes from the Boston Globe Society photographers illuminated the stone steps. Amelia stood beside Thomas, her hand on his arm, feeling like a counterfeit coin. Her simple blue dress, which had felt elegant in her apartment, now seemed glaringly inadequate beside the glittering cascades of sequins and heirloom diamonds. Claire, in a crimson, backless Oscar de la Renta, shot Amelia a look of pitying contempt. "Oh, Amelia," Claire drawled, loud enough for the passing guests to hear. "You actually wore it. How brave." Thomas stiffened, a flash of irritation in his eyes, but it was directed at Amelia, not his sister. "Claire," he muttered, before steering Amelia into the grand ballroom. The room was suffocatingly opulent. Towering bouquets of white orchids and lilies scented the air, their perfume mingling with the expensive colognes of the men and the Chanel No. 5, favored by the older women. A string quartet played Vivaldi in the corner, providing a civilized backing track to the ruthless networking. "There's Mr. Harrison," Thomas said, his eyes scanning the room, his hand dropping from Amelia's. "He's the COO from Vance Holdings. I must speak with him. Try to mingle." He was gone in an instant, absorbed into a circle of men in bespoke tuxedos, leaving Amelia utterly alone. She felt the eyes on her, the whispers. She was the plain brown bird in a cage of peacocks. She saw Mrs. Abernathy, a society columnist whose pen could ruin a reputation, assessing her dress with a critical squint. Amelia retreated toward the champagne tower, hoping to find a quiet corner. Margaret Davenport intercepted her, a predator, spotting a weakened gazelle. "Amelia, darling, you look positively economical." Margaret smiled, her eyes cold. "I do hope you're not feeling overwhelmed. This is, after all, a very important night for Richard and Thomas." "It's a beautiful party, Margaret," Amelia replied, her voice steady. "Yes, it is," Margaret agreed, plucking a flute of champagne from a passing tray. "It's a celebration of what we've built, what we represent. Legacy, Amelia. Lineage. Something I'm sure you understand is earned, not just married into." The barb was clear. Amelia was an outsider, a parasite feeding off a legacy she didn't deserve. "Excuse me," Amelia said, turning away, her cheeks burning. She found a momentary reprieve on the terrace, the cold November air a welcome shock. She watched the lights of the city glitter below, feeling a profound sense of dislocation. She had left one world of immense wealth, only to be trapped and humiliated by another, lesser version. Her father had built an empire from nothing. The Davenports had inherited one and were watching it crumble. The irony was bitter. "Hiding?" Amelia turned. It was Claire, a malicious smirk on her face. "Not hiding, Claire. Getting some air." "Right." Claire took a delicate sip of her drink. "You know, we all thought Thomas was just going through a phase, a rebellion, dating the help, as it were. We just never thought he'd be stupid enough to marry her. I own my own business, Claire, a successful one." "Oh, the bakery." Claire laughed, a high, tinkling sound. "It's adorable, like a little girl playing shop. But this," she gestured to the grand house, the expensive party, "this is the real world. And in the real world, you're a liability. Mother is furious. You're embarrassing Thomas in front of the Vance Holdings people. You're dragging our name through the mud with your simplicity." "I think you mistake simple for sincere, Claire. Something this family wouldn't recognize." Claire's smile vanished. "You little—" "Claire! Amelia! What are you two doing out here?" Margaret's voice cut through the tension. She glided onto the terrace, her eyes landing on Amelia. "Come inside, both of you. They're serving the appetizers." Margaret led the way, placing a proprietary hand on Amelia's back, steering her toward a cluster of guests. "You must try the canapes, Amelia. We have a wonderful—" "Oh, goodness!" Margaret stumbled, her hand lurching forward. A full glass of dark, viscous, balsamic glaze, meant for the fig and prosciutto crostini, emptied itself directly down the front of Amelia's blue silk dress. A collective gasp went up from the nearby guests. The dark stain spread rapidly, a hideous, sticky mockery. "Oh, my dear!" Margaret shrieked, her hand flying to her mouth in faux horror. "How clumsy of me! Your lovely dress! It's ruined! Absolutely ruined!" Amelia stood frozen, the sticky sweet smell of the glaze filling her nostrils, the sudden cold as the liquid soaked through the silk to her skin. She looked at Margaret's face and saw, in the briefest flash, a glint of pure, unadulterated triumph. This was no accident. "Quickly, quickly," Margaret said, grabbing Amelia's arm in a vice-like grip. "Let's get you upstairs before more people see this mess." She began to steer Amelia toward the grand staircase, away from the ballroom. Claire followed close behind, her face a mask of poorly concealed glee. Amelia looked back, desperate for Thomas. He was standing across the room, watching. He saw the glaze. He saw his mother's iron grip on his wife's arm. He saw Amelia's eyes plead with him. He looked away. The rejection was more painful than the humiliation. It was the final, fatal crack in the foundation of their marriage. As Margaret practically dragged her up the stairs, Amelia knew she wasn't being taken to be helped. She was being taken to be finished. The upstairs hallway of the Davenport mansion was a gallery of ancestors. Stern-faced men and women in dark oils stared down from their gilded frames, their expressions as cold and unforgiving as the two women now flanking Amelia. Margaret's grip on her arm was bruising. "In here," Margaret ordered, shoving Amelia into a large, opulent guest bedroom. Claire followed and clicked the heavy wooden door shut, the sound final and ominous. "Really, Amelia," Margaret began, her voice dropping the pretense of concern, becoming a low, venomous hiss. "Did you think this was going to last? Did you think we were so stupid?" "Margaret, it was an accident," Amelia started, clutching the ruined fabric of her dress. "Stop lying," Claire snapped, her face twisted in disgust. "You've been lying since the day you met Thomas, playing the simple, innocent little baker. We know exactly what you are." "What are you talking about?" Amelia's heart began to hammer against her ribs, a cold dread creeping up her spine. This was more than a spilled drink. This was a planned execution. "We're talking about this." Margaret moved to the mahogany dresser and yanked open a drawer. She pulled out a small, velvet-lined box. "Do you recognize this?" She opened it. Inside sat a cheap, gaudy replica of the Davenport heirloom earrings, a set of sapphire and diamond clusters that Margaret had been wearing earlier in the evening. "No," Amelia said, confused. "What is that?" "Don't play coy." Margaret's voice rose to a screech. "These are my earrings, my great-grandmother's. I took them off for a moment, left them right here, and you thief, you thought you'd swap them. You thought you'd take the real ones and leave this paste. Did you think we wouldn't notice?" Amelia stared, horrified. "What? Margaret, that's insane. I haven't been in this room all night. You're wearing your earrings." Amelia pointed to Margaret's ears. The real, glittering sapphire earrings were plainly visible. Claire let out a cruel laugh. "Oh, you're pathetic. You didn't even check to see if she'd put them back on. You just saw your chance, swapped them and got caught. You were probably going to sell them to pay for your sad little bread shop." "This is a setup," Amelia breathed, the full horrifying reality of the situation crashing down on her. They had planned this. The spill, the replica, the accusation. They were framing her. "It's over, Amelia," Margaret said, her eyes glittering with a madness Amelia hadn't seen before. "You came into this house with nothing, and you'll leave with less. You are a gold-digging fraud, and I am going to expose you to everyone." "Thomas will not let you do this," Amelia said, her voice shaking but desperate. "He knows me." "Thomas?" Margaret laughed, a truly ugly sound. "Thomas does what is best for this family. He knows this deal with Vance Holdings will be ruined if a scandal breaks that he married a common thief. He will thank me for cutting this cancer out." "You won't get away with this," Amelia whispered, tears of rage and humiliation welling in her eyes. "Oh, I already have." Margaret's smile was terrifying. "You want to be trash? I'll treat you like trash." Before Amelia could react, Margaret lunged at her. She grabbed the collar of the silk dress, already sticky with the balsamic glaze. "This dress, you bought it with my son's money, didn't you? You have nothing of your own." "No, I bought this with—" "Lies!" Margaret shrieked, and she yanked. The sound of the silk ripping was explosive in the quiet room. It was the sound Amelia would remember forever. Margaret pulled again, harder, tearing the fabric from Amelia's shoulder down to her waist. The dress, now a ruined rack, gaped open, exposing her slip and the side of her bra. Amelia cried out, more in shock than pain, stumbling back, trying to cover herself. "See," Claire said, filming the entire thing with her phone, her eyes wide with malicious delight. "This is your true self, a cheap, tawdry little thing hidden under a veneer of decency." "Stop, please," Amelia begged, tears streaming down her face now. "Now get out of my house," Margaret snarled, her chest heaving. She grabbed Amelia's arm again and dragged her to the door. "No, Margaret, you can't." "I can. And I will." Margaret yanked the door open. The string quartet in the ballroom below had just finished a piece. A momentary, perfect silence had fallen over the gala. Every eye in the grand foyer was turned toward the staircase as Margaret shoved Amelia, half-dressed and sobbing, out onto the landing. The collective gasp was like the sucking of all air from the room. Amelia froze, one hand clutching the torn fragments of her dress to her chest, the other trying to hide her face. She saw it all in a horrifying, slow-motion tableau. The shocked faces of Boston's elite, the frozen smiles of the waitstaff, the flash of Mrs. Abernathy's eyes, wide with the scent of the decade's biggest scandal. And she saw Thomas. He was standing at the bottom of the stairs, next to the man from Vance Holdings. He was staring up at her. His face was white, his mouth slightly open. He saw her shame, her dress, her tears. He saw his mother and sister standing behind her, triumphant. "Thomas," Amelia whispered, the word a desperate, dying prayer. "Thomas, help me." He looked at her, his eyes blank with a cocktail of terror and shame. He saw his entire future, the Vance deal, his family's legacy, all hanging in the balance. Then, slowly, he turned his back. He turned his back on his wife. That was the moment Amelia's heart, which had been cracked by his neglect, finally shattered into dust. The humiliation of her in-laws was one thing. The betrayal of her husband was another. "Get out," Margaret hissed, giving her one final violent shove. Amelia stumbled, catching herself on the banister. She held her head high, the tears freezing on her cheeks. She refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her run. With as much dignity as a person in a ripped dress, stained and humiliated, could muster, she descended the grand staircase, one step at a time. She walked through the center of the silent, staring crowd. She walked past her husband, who refused to look at her. She walked to the massive front doors, pulled one open, and stepped out into the biting cold of the Boston night, the door clicking shut behind her, sealing her fate. Or so they thought. The cold of the November night was a violent slap, instantly chilling her exposed skin and making her shiver uncontrollably. The Beacon Hill street was quiet, the cobblestones slick with a fine, misty rain that had begun to fall. Amelia stood on the pavement, clutching the rags of her dress, the laughter and music from the house behind her, a dull, monstrous heartbeat. She was alone, utterly and completely. The family she had tried to join had cast her out in the most brutal way imaginable. The man she had loved, the man she had sacrificed her identity for, had watched it happen and chosen them. The tears came again, hot and silent. She began to walk, with no destination in mind. She just needed to move, to put distance between herself and that house of horrors. Her thin-soled heels clicked unevenly on the ancient stones. A couple in evening wear, likely heading to the gala, passed her. They stared, the woman's hand flying to her mouth, the man's eyes widening in shock before he quickly looked away. Humiliation washed over her anew. She was a spectacle, a ruined woman on a dark street. She walked for blocks, the mist turning into a steady, cold drizzle, plastering her hair to her face and soaking the torn silk. She was freezing, but the ice in her heart was colder. She passed a small park, a familiar one where she and Thomas had once... No, she couldn't think of him. He was gone. The Thomas she loved had never existed. He was just a phantom she had created. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. They're parasites, Amelia. He had been right. He had been right about everything. And she, in her youthful arrogance, had dismissed his warning, believing in a fairy tale. She found herself in the Boston Common, the rain now heavy and relentless. She huddled under the bare branches of a large oak tree, shivering so hard her teeth chattered. Her life, as she knew it, was over. She had nothing. No home, no husband, her bakery. They would probably try to take that too, claiming it was built with Davenport money. She had one thing left, one connection to a life she had sprinted away from, thinking it was a prison. She realized now that a prison with golden bars was still a prison, but at least it was safe. Her hand went to the small, hidden pocket sewn into the lining of her purse, a purse Margaret and Claire hadn't bothered to take. Inside, protected by a waterproof plastic case, was a simple, old-fashioned flip phone. It had one number programmed in it, a direct, encrypted line to a man who could move mountains. Her fingers, numb with cold, fumbled with the phone. She flipped it open. The small screen glowed, a beacon in the dark. She pressed 1 and held it to her ear. It rang once, twice. Yes. The voice was not a hello. It was a command, gravelly, impatient, and vibrating with an authority that could quiet boardrooms and intimidate world leaders. Amelia tried to speak, but a sob caught in her throat. "Who is this?" the voice demanded, sharper now. "Dad!" she finally choked out, the word feeling foreign on her tongue after so long. "Dad, it's me. It's Amelia." The silence on the other end was absolute. For a terrifying second, she thought he had hung up. Then, the ice in his voice cracked, just slightly. "Amelia? What's wrong? Where are you?" I'm in Boston, at the Common." The dam broke. The humiliation, the betrayal, the cold, it all poured out of her in a single, wretched sob. "Dad, you were right. You were right about everything." Another pause, the sound of a heavy chair pushing back. "What did they do to you?" His voice was dangerously quiet now. This was the voice he used when an executive had lost him $1 billion. They tore my dress. They called me a thief. They pushed me out, Dad, in front of everyone. And Thomas, he watched. He let them." She could hear him breathing, a slow, controlled inhale and exhale. He wasn't comforting her. He was containing a rage so vast it could power a city. "Stay exactly where you are," he commanded, "by the Parkman bandstand. Don't move. Don't talk to anyone. A car will be there in 4 minutes." "Dad, I'm so cold. 4 minutes, Amelia." The line clicked dead. Amelia huddled by the bandstand, the rain washing the sticky glaze from her skin. She felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. Not just safety, but power. The Davenports had attacked a baker. They had no idea they had just declared war on a king. It was closer to 3 minutes. A car turned onto the street, its headlights cutting through the rain. It wasn't a taxi or an Uber. It was a black Bentley Mulsanne, its windows tinted to an impenetrable darkness, its presence on the quiet street as subtle as a tank. It pulled to the curb, and a man in a dark suit, built like a linebacker, stepped out from the driver's side, holding a large black umbrella. He walked quickly to Amelia. "Miss Vance?" he asked, his voice respectful. The name Vance felt like a shock. She hadn't heard herself called that in 3 years. "Yes," she whispered. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't stare at her dress. He simply draped a heavy, dry cashmere blanket over her shoulders and gently guided her to the car, holding the umbrella over her head. He opened the back door. The interior of the car was a different world. It was silent, warm, and smelled of rich leather and old money, real old money, the kind that didn't need to host galas to prove itself. Amelia slid onto the plush seat, wrapping the blanket around her trembling body. "Where are we going?" she asked, as the driver got in and the car pulled silently away from the curb. "To the penthouse at the Four Seasons, Miss Vance. Your father is on his way. His jet left New York 10 minutes ago." Amelia leaned her head back against the buttery leather. The driver touched a console, and a small screen lit up. Her father's face appeared, live from his jet. He looked older, but his eyes were the same. Sharp, intelligent, and right now burning with a cold fire. "You're safe, Amelia," he said. "Get warm, get dry. I'll be there in an hour." "Dad, what are you going to do?" Arthur Vance looked at his daughter, his only child, shivering and humiliated. His expression was terrible to behold. "The Davenports," he said, his voice a flat, level promise of annihilation, "are about to learn the precise, documented, and catastrophic difference between status and power." Arthur Vance did not rule his empire with noise and fury. He was an architect of silence. He didn't throw plates. He signed papers that liquidated companies. He didn't shout. He made quiet phone calls that ended careers. His rage was not a fire. It was a glacier, cold, immense, and unstoppable, crushing everything in its path. By the time his Gulfstream GX-50 was descending over the Boston skyline, the first pieces of his retribution were already in motion. He arrived at the Four Seasons penthouse, not with a hug, but with a team. A doctor was there to check Amelia for any injuries. A lawyer, flown in from New York, was quietly taking notes. A woman who introduced herself as his personal assistant, Maria, had already run a hot bath for Amelia and laid out a set of simple, impossibly soft cashmere pajamas. While Amelia soaked in the tub, trying to scrub the night's humiliation from her skin, Arthur Vance stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his phone to his ear, his back to the room. He was looking down at the lights of the city, at the very neighborhood that had just tried to destroy his daughter. "Mark," he said into the phone, speaking to his COO, the very man who had been at the gala. "Yes, I heard what happened. It's worse than you think. No, you are not to speak to Thomas Davenport. You are not to look at him. I want you to call Richard Davenport at exactly 7 a.m. Tell him the merger is off. Cite unforeseen moral liabilities in the family leadership. Yes, moral. I want that word used. Then, I want you to trigger the default clause on the bridge loan we gave them 2 months ago. The one they secured against their Beacon Hill house. Yes, all of it. I want it called in by 9 a.m. He hung up and immediately dialed another number. "Jennifer, it's Arthur. I need you to run a story. The Boston Globe, front page, above the fold. Yes, it's a big one. The Davenport Foundation. I'm sending my forensic accounting team's preliminary findings. It's a shell game. They're spending less than 10% on actual charity. The rest? Gala expenses, wardrobe, consulting fees to Claire Davenport. It's all there. I want the word fraud used. How soon? I want it on the street by noon tomorrow." He disconnected and looked at his lawyer. "Alan, I want divorce papers drawn up. Immediately. The state of Massachusetts. Irreconcilable differences. No, we will not be equitable. I want a full clawback on every penny my daughter's bakery invested into that sham of a marriage. He wants to live on his family's money? Fine. Let him. We will be seeking damages for emotional distress, slander, and public humiliation. I want him served at his mother's house. Tomorrow, at breakfast. Mr. Vance, the lawyer said, that's aggressive. We may not. Make it happen, Arthur said, his voice flat. He turned as Amelia emerged from the bathroom, her face scrubbed clean, her small frame swallowed by the pajamas. She looked like a child again, lost and broken. The ice in his demeanor melted, but only for her. Better? He asked. She nodded, her eyes red. They were filming it, Dad. Claire, on her phone. Arthur Vance went very, very still. They're going to put it everywhere. No, Arthur said. The word was a chilling, absolute statement. He picked up his phone again. Get me our head of digital security. I don't care that it's 2 a.m. Wake him up. Yes, now. He spent the next hour coordinating a digital strike team. They would target Claire's phone, her cloud accounts, and any device she might have synced to. The video would not see the light of day. If it did, the platforms hosting it would find themselves facing lawsuits from Vance Holdings' legal team that would make their servers melt. Finally, he sat down. Maria brought them both tea. For a long time, they just sat in silence, the storm outside matching the one inside. Why didn't you tell me, Amelia? He asked, his voice softer now. Why did you let it get this bad? I wanted him to love me, she whispered, staring into her cup. Not Vance. Not the money. I wanted to be normal. I wanted to build something that was mine. The bakery. It was mine. And it still is, Arthur said. He never loved you, Amelia. He loved the idea of you, the novelty. But he's weak. And weak men are always cruel when they're scared. The Davenports, they're not old money. They're just old. Their industry is dying. Their name is leveraged to the hilt. That gala wasn't a party. It was a yard sale. They were selling their name to me. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a rare, heavy sadness. I built this entire world, this fortress, to protect you, ever since your mother died, and you walked out the front gate and handed the enemy the keys. I know, she wept. I'm so sorry, Dad. Don't be sorry, he said, placing a hand over hers. It was an awkward gesture for him, but it meant the world to her. Be smart. You are a Vance. Your mother was the strongest person I ever knew, and you are her daughter. You are my daughter. They didn't just strip you for shame, Amelia. They stripped you of your illusions. They showed you who they are. Now, we will show them who we are. He stood up and went back to the window, the first grey light of dawn breaking over the city. Tomorrow, he said, more to himself than to her, the House of Davenport begins its public liquidation. They wanted to be the center of attention at their party. I'll make them the center of the world's attention. Amelia watched her father, this reclusive architect of power, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of his power. She was grateful for it. The Davenports had wanted to humiliate a baker. They had no idea they had just awakened the dragon. The Retribution was not a single, fiery explosion. It was a systematic, clinical, and inescapable demolition. Arthur Vance didn't just want to ruin the Davenports. He wanted to erase them. 7 a.m. Richard Davenport was in his study, nursing a severe brandy hangover and fielding calls from angry guests when his private line rang. It was Mark Harrison, the COO of Vance Holdings. Richard, Harrison's voice was cold, stripped of all orny previous cordiality. We're pulling out. The merger is off, effective immediately. Richard's blood ran cold. What? Mark, Wait, is this about that unfortunate business with my daughter-in-law? It was a family misunderstanding, I assure you. Mr. Davenport, Harrison interrupted. We are terminating the agreement based on Clause 12B of our letter of intent. Material misrepresentation and moral liabilities. Your family's public conduct has proven you to be an unstable and unreliable partner. We no longer have confidence in the Davenport name. Moral liabilities? What does that mean? It means, Richard, that we're done here. You'll be hearing from our lawyers. The line went dead. 9:04 a.m. Richard was still staring at the phone when his other line rang. It was his banker at First National Boston. Richard, I've got some deeply troubling news, the banker stammered, his voice uncharacteristically shaky. Vance Holdings. They held the note on your bridge loan. What? I thought you held the note. No, they bought it out from under us 3 weeks ago, kept it quiet. Richard, they're calling it in. All of it. They're citing the default clause based on the failed merger. You have until Friday to repay $47 million. Richard dropped the phone. The blood drained from his face, leaving it a pasty, sickly grey. 47 million? They didn't have 47,000 in liquid assets. The loan was secured against everything. The house, the company. 12:15 p.m. Margaret Davenport, having taken a sedative, finally woke. She put on her silk robe and descended the grand staircase, ordering the staff to clean up the remnants of the party. "And find my son," she snapped. "He needs to go to his apartment and make sure that creature didn't steal the silver." A maid, trembling, held out a copy of the Boston Globe. It had just been delivered. Margaret snatched it and froze. The entire front page was dominated by a picture of her and Richard at the gala, smiling. The headline, in a massive, brutal font, read, "Davenport Foundation, a shameful fraud. Report alleges charity funneled millions to family's lavish lifestyle." The article was meticulous. It detailed the exact percentage, 8.7%, that actually went to charity. It named Claire as the recipient of a $300,000 social media consulting fee. It tracked the donations used to pay for the gala's champagne, Margaret's gowns, and Richard's club memberships. It was, in short, a complete and total assassination of their reputation, backed by leaked documents and anonymous insider quotes. Margaret let out a sound, a choked, strangled shriek. 2:30 p.m. Thomas Davenport, who had been hiding in his old bedroom, finally emerged. His phone was exploding. Friends, partners, and board members were all calling, demanding answers. He saw the newspaper. He heard his father shouting in the study, something about liquidation and ruin. He ran to his car. He had to find Amelia. He had to fix this. She was reasonable. She loved him. He could explain. It was his mother. She was unhinged. He was scared. He drove to their apartment in Cambridge. It was empty. Her clothes were gone. He tried the bakery. The door was locked. A new, handwritten sign was in the window, closed indefinitely due to family emergency. He was pounding on the glass when 2 men in dark suits approached him. "Thomas Davenport?" "Yes, what?" he snapped. The man handed him a thick envelope. "You've been served." Thomas tore it open, standing on the sidewalk. "Petition for dissolution of marriage. Amelia Vance versus Thomas Davenport." Vance? He read the name again. Amelia Vance. He stumbled backward, leaning against the cold brick of the bakery. Vance. As in Vance Holdings? It was impossible. He would have known. She was a baker. She was nobody. And then it hit him. The simple upbringing, the avoidance of questions about her family, the private, reclusive father she never, ever spoke of. Her name, Amelia Vance. Arthur Vance. Oh my God, Thomas whispered, sliding down the wall to sit on the pavement, the divorce papers scattering around him. Oh my God. He hadn't just watched his wife be humiliated. He had stood by, silent, as his mother and sister assaulted the daughter of the one man, the only man, who held their entire family's fate in his hands. He scrambled for his phone, his hands shaking so violently he could barely type. He called Amelia's number. It went straight to a disconnected message. 4 p.m. Back at the penthouse, Amelia watched the news. Every local station was camped outside the Beacon Hill mansion, broadcasting live. Mrs. Abernathy, the society columnist, was giving a tearful and gleeful interview about the toxic, fraudulent environment inside the Davenport home. The IRS had announced a full-scale audit. The SEC was opening an investigation into Davenport Industries. Claire's phone, remotely wiped by Arthur's team, was a useless brick. Her social media accounts, which were her entire life, had been suspended for fraudulent activity. She was a pariah. Amelia felt numb. She had wanted justice, but this was something else. This was annihilation. Is it enough, Dad?" she asked quietly. Arthur Vance, who was on a call with Sotheby's auction house, muted his phone. "Enough? We're just getting started, Amelia. They tore your dress. I'm taking their house. They called you a thief. I'm seizing their assets. They tried to shame you. I'm going to make their name a synonym for disgrace. It's not enough until they have nothing left to take." He unmuted his phone. "Yes, Mr. Grant. I am interested in the house. I'd like to make a pre-auction offer, contingent on the current owners being evicted by Monday. My price will be aggressive." The fall was as swift as it was brutal. By Friday, the Davenport name was toxic. Friends and business partners vaporized, their calls going unanswered. The bank had foreclosed on the Beacon Hill mansion, and the family was given 48 hours to vacate the premises. The final humiliating image of the Davenports was not from a gala, but from a grainy cell phone video taken by a neighbor. It showed Margaret and Claire, their faces hidden by large sunglasses, loading suitcases into the back of a rented SUV. Richard, looking like a man who had aged 20 years in a week, stood by, arguing with a man from the bank who was changing the locks. They were, in a word, finished. Thomas, facing the lawsuit from Amelia and disowned by his own ruined parents, who blamed him for bringing the viper into their home, was last seen applying for a low-level analyst job at a firm that didn't know his name. A month later, Amelia stood once again in front of the grand Beacon Hill mansion. It was a cold, clear December morning. The house was empty, stripped of all its belongings, sold at auction to pay a fraction of the family's debts. A sold sign hung from the iron gate. "Are you sure you want this, Amelia?" Arthur Vance asked, standing beside her. He had a black town car waiting. "I am," she said. Her voice was different, stronger, colder. The baker was still in her, but the Vance had taken root. She wasn't just visiting, she was the new owner. Arthur, through a shell corporation, had bought the house for a fraction of its value. He had presented the keys to her that morning. "It's yours," he'd said. "Burn it down for all I care." Amelia, however, had a different idea. She walked up the stone steps, the same steps she had fled from in shame, and put the new key in the lock. The heavy door swung open. She walked into the grand ballroom. It was empty, the floors bare, the walls showing faint outlines where paintings had hung for a century. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. This was the exact spot. The spot where her dress was torn. The spot where her husband had turned his back. She stood there for a long time. Her father waited by the door, watching his daughter. "You know," Amelia said, her voice echoing slightly in the vast, empty room, "I spent so long running from your name, Dad. I was so afraid of what it meant. I thought it was a cage. But she gestured to the empty house, they showed me that this is a cage. This obsession with status, with appearances, with legacy. It's a prison of their own making." She turned to him, a small, determined smile on her face. "They stripped me for shame. They wanted to show the world I was trash. But they just tore off the costume I was wearing." "So what now?" Arthur asked. "We'll redecorate. A little less gold." "No," Amelia said, shaking her head. "I'm not living here. I'm giving it away." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "I met with my lawyer yesterday," Amelia continued, walking toward the center of the room. "I'm setting up a new foundation, a real one, not a shell game to buy champagne. I'm turning this entire house into a sanctuary, a shelter for women escaping domestic abuse, a place where they can come, with or without their children, and be safe, get legal help, and learn how to build their own lives. We'll call it the Phoenix House, for women rising from the ashes." Arthur Vance looked at his daughter, and for the first time in her memory, his sharp, calculating eyes softened with unmistakable, profound pride. He hadn't just gotten his daughter back. He had found an heir. "The Phoenix House," he repeated, testing the words. He nodded, a genuine smile touching his lips. "I like it. It will need funding, a significant endowment. I'll have my team set it up by end of day." Amelia smiled back, the warmth finally reaching her own eyes. The humiliation was still a scar, but it no longer hurt to the touch. The Davenports had tried to destroy her, but they had only succeeded in reforging her. She had walked out of this house a victim. Today, she walked back in as its master, ready to turn a place of pain into a house of power. 1 year to the day. That was the date Amelia had chosen. The Beacon Hill mansion no longer hid behind its veil of ivy and old-world gloom. The red brick had been cleaned, the heavy oak doors painted a deep, welcoming sapphire blue. Where a bronze plaque had once borne the Davenport name, a new one was bolted to the stone. The Phoenix House, a sanctuary for rebuilding. The grand ballroom, the scene of her deepest humiliation, was unrecognizable. The dark, imposing oil portraits of Davenport ancestors were gone, replaced by vibrant, hopeful art, donated by local female artists. The cold marble floors were softened with warm rugs, and instead of a string quartet, the room was filled with the gentle murmur of conversation. This was the official opening, and the guest list was a pointed testament to Amelia's new life. City council members stood next to social workers, and police commissioners chatted with the heads of women's advocacy groups. And, in a front-row seat, pen and paper in hand, was Mrs. Abernathy. Her column in the Boston Globe that morning had not been about society scandal, but a glowing, fawning profile of Amelia Vance and her breathtaking act of philanthropic alchemy. Amelia stood at a simple lectern, not in silk, but in a sharp, elegant navy blue pantsuit. She looked out at the crowd, her father, Arthur, watching from the back, his arms crossed, a look of quiet, unshakable pride on his face. "A year ago," Amelia began, her voice clear and steady, echoing in the transformed space. "This room was a symbol of something very different. It was a place of exclusion, of judgment, of power used as a weapon." She paused, feeling the weight of the memory, but it no longer had the power to wound her. It was simply a fact. Many of you have read the stories about what happened here. Some of you were even present. She made brief, neutral eye contact with a visibly uncomfortable Mrs. Abernathy. I learned that night that a foundation built on arrogance will eventually crumble. I learned that legacy isn't something you inherit, it's something you build. And most of all, I learned what it feels like to have nowhere to go, to be entirely alone. She gestured to the house around her. So we have rebuilt this house from the foundation up. The name Davenport is a memory. Today this house becomes the Phoenix House. It will be a place for women who have been made to feel small, to feel ashamed, or to feel afraid. It will be a place of safety, of legal aid, of job training, and of new beginnings. This building, once a monument to a hollow past, is now an investment in a powerful future. It is not my house. It is your house. The applause was thunderous. Later, as the guests mingled, her head of security, the same man who had rescued her in the rain, approached her. "Ma'am, there's a disturbance at the front gate." Amelia followed him to the foyer. Through the reinforced glass of the new doors, she could see him. Thomas. He was thin, his expensive suit rumpled and ill-fitting. His hair was unkempt, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. He was pleading with the guard at the gate. "Amelia! Amelia, please!" he shouted, spotting her. "Just 5 minutes. They took everything. My mother. She's broken. My father won't even speak. I have nothing." Amelia watched him, her heart as still as a winter pond. There was no rage left, no lingering love. There was only a vast, empty pity for this weak, hollow man. He hadn't come to apologize for what he'd done to her. He'd come to beg for what she had. "I'm sorry, Thomas," she said, her voice too quiet for him to hear through the glass. She turned to her security chief. "He's not to be allowed on the property. Ever. If he persists, have him removed." "Yes, ma'am." She turned her back on him, on the life he represented, and walked away. His shouts of, "Amelia, don't do this, I love you," were cut off as the heavy inner door clicked shut, the sound as final as a gavel. That evening, long after the donors and politicians had gone, the house welcomed its first family. A young woman named Jessica, with a toddler on her hip and a 5-year-old boy clutching her hand, stood nervously in the grand foyer. She had a fading bruise on her cheek. Amelia dismissed the staff for the night and approached them with a warm, genuine smile. "Welcome to Phoenix House," she said softly. "I'm Amelia. I'll be showing you to your suite. Are you hungry? I baked some cookies earlier, chocolate chip." The little boy, who hadn't spoken, nodded, his eyes wide. "I thought so," Amelia smiled. She took his small hand, and together the three of them walked up the grand staircase, the same staircase she had been shoved down in her torn dress toward a new, safe life. What the Davenports forgot is that true power is never loud. It doesn't need to host a gala or wear a label. True power is quiet, precise, and absolute. They believed that class was something you could buy, a name you could inherit, or a dress you could wear. Amelia proved them wrong. She showed them that true class is how you carry yourself when you have nothing, and how you behave when you have everything. Her in-laws tried to strip her of her dignity, but all they did was strip away her disguise, revealing the unshakable core of a woman they were too blind to see. They built their house on a foundation of lies and arrogance. She rebuilt it on a foundation of compassion and strength. This wasn't just retribution. It was a reckoning. Do you believe that karma always finds its way? If this story reminds you of the power of resilience and the cold, satisfying price of arrogance, then please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more true life stories where justice is finally served.